6 months from now, you will be somewhere. The question is not whether time will pass. It will. The question is who arrives when it does. Because here is what most people never stop to consider. 6 months is not a long time. It is 180 days. It is roughly 26 weekends. It is the distance between January and July. And in that amount of time, that specific, finite, completely achievable amount of time, a person can become so fundamentally different that the people who knew them before struggle to reconcile the two versions. Not different in the way of someone who bought new clothes and started using new vocabulary. Different in the way that actually matters, the way they think, the way they carry themselves, the way they respond to difficulty, the standards they hold themselves to without having to force it. This video is not a list of habits. It is not a morning routine. It is not a productivity system. It is the actual map of how a person changes at the level that sticks. The map has a beginning, a middle, and a destination. Each part has its own work. Each part builds on the one before it. And the time each part takes is yours to determine. For some people, one part takes 2 weeks. For others, it takes 2 months. What matters is not the speed. What matters is the sequence. Do not skip ahead. Do not rush through something because it feels uncomfortable. Each part is doing something the next part cannot do without it. By the end of this video, you will know exactly where to begin, what to move through, and what you are building toward. Let's begin. Before we get to the map, we need to address the reason previous attempts did not hold. Because most people watching this have tried to change before, more than once. They built streaks that eventually broke, made progress that eventually reversed, and quietly concluded that sustained transformation might simply not be available to them. That conclusion is wrong, but the approach that produced it was also wrong. Here is the core mistake. Most people try to change their behavior without changing their identity. They focus entirely on what they need to do differently, the habits, the routines, the actions, and they treat those actions as the thing that will change them. But behavior is not the source of transformation. It is the output of it. Behavior flows downstream from identity, from the deep, often unconscious beliefs a person holds about who they are. The person who believes they are someone who works hard, not through constant force, not through motivation, just through consistency with their own self-image. And the person who at some level still sees themselves as someone who struggles with discipline, who is not the kind of person who follows through, will keep producing behavior consistent with that belief. No matter how many new habits they attempt, no matter how many fresh starts they make, the behavior will keep reverting to match the identity, because identity always wins. Always. This means the entire framework most people use is built backwards. They are trying to change the output without changing the source. The process that follows works differently. It works at the level of identity first, and everything else, the behavior, the results, the version of you that other people will not recognize, follows from that. But before identity can change, something else has to happen first. Something most people skip entirely because it is uncomfortable. Everything begins with seeing. Not with action, not with a plan, with seeing clearly. Because before anything can be built, something has to be examined. Without defense, without the softening that most people apply when they look at their own lives. Most people do not actually know the honest state of their life. They know the story they tell about it, the version that explains away the gaps, that reframes the stagnation, that positions every avoided thing as a reasonable delay rather than a pattern of avoidance. This is about setting that story aside, and looking at what is actually there. Not to produce shame, not to produce motivation through self-criticism, but to produce clarity, because you cannot navigate from where you want to be. You can only navigate from where you actually are. And most people have never allowed themselves to look at where they actually are with complete honesty. Find time with no distractions and answer 3 questions, not aspirationally, honestly. The first question: what is actually working in your life right now? Not what should be working, not what you're trying to make work. What is genuinely, demonstrably working? The areas where your life is moving in the right direction, without constant struggle. Write them down. They matter because they reveal what you are already doing right. The patterns and environments and decisions that are producing good results. These are not things to change. They are things to protect and understand. The second question: what is not working and has not been working for longer than you want to admit? This is the uncomfortable one. The patterns that keep repeating. The areas where progress keeps stalling. The things you keep saying you will address and keep not addressing. Write them down without explanation. Not, this is not working because of X circumstance. Just, this is not working. The explanations can come later. Right now, the goal is to see the pattern without defending it. The third question: what have you been avoiding looking at? This is the most important question of the 3, because the answer almost always contains the most significant information about what needs to change. The thing you do not write down in the first 2 questions because it is too uncomfortable. The area of your life you scroll past mentally every time you approach it. The thing you know, at some level you know, but have been choosing not to examine. Write it down, not to solve it yet, just to acknowledge that it is there. After those 3 questions, live with the answers for a while. Do not rush into fixing anything. Do not immediately build a plan. Just observe. Watch yourself through the lens of honest awareness. Notice where your time actually goes versus where you say it goes. Notice what you avoid versus what you engage. Notice how the version of you that shows up in private compares to the version you describe to others. The goal here is not action. It is accurate seeing. Because every significant change ahead will be built on the foundation of knowing clearly where you are starting from. And most people skip this foundation entirely. They rush into change without first understanding what they are changing from, and then wonder why their new behaviors keep bumping into old patterns they never examined. See clearly first. Everything else requires this. Once you have sat with what you found, once the picture is clear without defense, the next part begins. It starts with a decision, not a goal, not a resolution, a decision about identity. There is a crucial difference between these things. A goal is something you want to achieve. An identity decision is a declaration about who you are. And the reason identity decisions are more powerful than goals is simple. Goals require constant remotivation. Every morning, you have to reconnect with why the goal matters. Fight through the resistance. Remind yourself of the desired outcome. But a person who has genuinely decided who they are does not negotiate with themselves in the same way. They act consistently with who they are. Not because they are forcing themselves, because the decision has already been made. The negotiation is over. The question of whether they will act a certain way has been resolved at the identity level, which means it does not need to be resolved again every morning at the behavior level. This is the shift that changes everything. Using what you learned about yourself in the first part, answer one central question. Who is the person you need to become in order for the life you want to be a natural result of how you operate? Not what goals do you want to achieve. Who do you need to be? Think about this person specifically, not vaguely, not a better version of myself. Specifically, how does this person start their day? Not because they have a perfect morning routine, but what is their default relationship with the morning? How does this person respond when something difficult is required? What is their default relationship with discomfort? How does this person make decisions? What do they say yes to, and what do they say no to by default? How does this person talk about themselves, to others, and internally? What standards do they hold without having to remind themselves to hold them? Write this person down in as much specific detail as you can, not their achievements, their operating defaults, because the gap between who you are now and who this person is, that gap is not filled by achieving things. It is filled by changing defaults, one default at a time. 3 rules for defining this identity. Make it present tense. Not, I am going to become someone. I am someone. This is not self-deception. It is the language of identity rather than aspiration. There is a significant difference between telling your brain who you are going to be and telling it who you are. The second creates a standard to live up to immediately. The first creates permission to delay indefinitely. Make it specific. I am someone who is disciplined is too vague to generate consistent behavior. I am someone who does the most important work of my day before I open my phone is specific enough that every morning the brain can assess whether the behavior is consistent with the identity. Vague identities produce vague behavior. Specific identities produce specific behavior. Make it honest. Do not define the person you think you should be. Define the person whose life you actually want, not the impressive version, not the version that would make other people admire you, the version whose daily experience of being alive feels like yours. Because you cannot sustain an identity that is not genuinely yours. You can perform it for a while, but performance is exhausting, and it eventually collapses. Define the real person, the one you actually want to be, and then the work of becoming them begins. This is where most people who have made it this far make their biggest mistake. They expect results. They have seen their life honestly. They have made a clear identity decision, and now they expect their life to start reflecting that, visibly, measurably, quickly. But what comes next is not about results, it is about evidence. And the distinction between the two is one of the most important things in this entire video. Results are external, the body that has changed, the bank account that has grown, the relationships that have improved. Evidence is internal, the small, consistent actions that tell your brain, this is who I actually am. And right now, evidence is everything. Because the brain does not update its self-concept based on decisions alone. It updates based on proof, on the accumulation of instances where the behavior was consistent with the new identity. Every morning, the important work gets done before the phone comes out. That is a piece of evidence. Every time, the difficult conversation gets had instead of avoided. Evidence. Every time, the standard is held when compromising would have been easier. Evidence. None of these feel significant in the moment. That is precisely the point. The brain is not looking for dramatic proof. It is looking for consistent proof. And small actions repeated consistently across weeks are more convincing to the brain's self-concept than one dramatic action performed once. Here is why completion matters more than duration. When you start a task and abandon it, the brain registers an incomplete loop. A prediction was made, this person does this, and the behavior did not follow through. The prediction weakens. The identity signal does not fire. But when you start a task and complete it, even if the task was small, Even if it took 10 minutes instead of an hour, the loop closes. The prediction was made. The behavior followed. The signal fires. And the identity updates by a small but real amount. This is why a 10-minute session completed every day for 30 days does more for identity change than a 2-hour session attempted 5 times and abandoned. Not because 10 minutes produces more results, but because 10 minutes produces 30 completions. And 30 completions produce 30 identity signals. And 30 identity signals begin to build something the brain starts to recognize as a pattern. The pattern of someone who does what they say they will do. There is also a specific experience in this part of the process that most people are not prepared for. It is called the identity lag, and it is where most transformations quietly collapse. The identity lag is the gap between when the behavior changes and when the belief catches up. It is the period, sometimes weeks, sometimes longer, where you're acting like the new person, but you do not yet feel like them. The behavior is happening. The sessions are being completed. The standard is being held. But inside, something still feels performed. Like you are wearing clothes that do not quite fit. Like you are pretending to be someone you have not yet earned the right to be. This feeling is not a sign that something is wrong. It is not a sign that the change is not real. It is the completely normal, completely expected experience of a brain that has not yet accumulated enough evidence to update its self-concept. The belief is always behind the behavior, always. And the only way through the identity lag is to keep going anyway. To act like the person before you feel like them. Until one day, without announcement, without drama, you notice that the performance has become reality, that the behavior which once required pushing through resistance now simply happens, because it is simply who you are. Take the identity you defined. Identify the 3 behaviors that most directly represent that person operating at their default. Not 10 behaviors, 3. Now reduce each one to the smallest version that is still meaningful. Not the full version, the minimum viable version. If the person you are becoming reads for an hour each evening, start with 10 minutes. If the person you are becoming exercises 5 days a week, start with 3 days. If the person you are becoming does deep focused work for 3 hours each morning, start with 45 minutes. This is not settling for less. This is understanding how the brain builds new defaults. Through completion, through repetition, through the accumulation of closed loops that signal, this is who I am. One non-negotiable through all of this. Protect the streak. Not perfection, the streak. If a day is missed, the next day is non-negotiable. Not because the missed day is catastrophic, but because what happens after the missed day determines everything. The person who misses a day and returns immediately is building a different identity to the person who misses a day and waits 3 days to restart. The first person is becoming someone who does not quit when they slip. The second person is becoming someone for whom slipping is the beginning of stopping. Every return, however small, however unglamorous, is itself a piece of evidence. Not that you are perfect, that you are someone who comes back, and someone who always comes back, never actually stops. Now, while that evidence is accumulating, while the behavior is becoming more consistent and the resistance is slowly lowering, there is something else that needs to change. Something most people overlook completely. Environment. It sounds simple, but it is one of the most powerful forces working either for or against the person you are trying to become. When the behaviors begin to feel more consistent, when the resistance is lower than it was, this is exactly when most people make an error that undermines everything they have built. They keep the same environment. The same spaces, the same people, the same inputs, and they wonder why change feels harder than it should in certain contexts. Why they keep reverting around specific people. Why the old version of themselves keeps showing up in familiar situations. The answer is simple. Environment is not neutral. Every environment you exist in is either confirming or challenging your self-concept. The spaces you occupy communicate something to your brain about who you are. The people around you hold a version of you in their minds, usually the old version, and they interact with you according to that version. Their expectations, their assumptions, their casual references to who you have always been, all of it creates gravity, a pull toward being the person they have always known. Not malicious, just powerful. And fighting that gravity every day costs energy that could be going into building the new identity. The work here is to reduce the resistance by changing the gravitational field. Audit 3 things. Your physical spaces first. Look at the environment where you spend the most time. What does it make easy? What does it make difficult? The person you are becoming. Does your environment support their defaults or work against them? If your phone is the first thing you see when you wake up, change that. If your workspace is optimized for distraction rather than focus, change that. If the things that pull you toward old behavior are the most accessible things in your environment, change that. Make the new behavior easier to do than the old behavior. Not through willpower, through design. Your inputs next. What are you consuming daily? Not just social media. Everything. The podcasts, the conversations, the content, the news. Ask honestly, does this input reinforce the identity you are building, or does it undermine it? Not every input needs to be optimized, but the ones that are actively working against your new identity need to be reduced or removed, because inputs shape beliefs, and beliefs generate behavior. You cannot fill your mind daily with content that confirms the old identity and expect the new one to consolidate. And then the people. This is the most sensitive part of the audit, and it requires more honesty than most people are comfortable with. Because the influence other people have on your identity is not something most people consciously acknowledge. It operates beneath the surface, in the casual assumptions embedded in how people talk to you, in the jokes that reference the old version of you as though it is still current, in the expectations that have calcified around who you have always been in that relationship, in the way certain people make you feel, not through anything malicious, but through the accumulated history of who you have been around them, like a specific, familiar, old version of yourself. This is social gravity, and it is one of the most powerful forces working against identity change. Because humans are deeply social creatures. The brain is exquisitely sensitive to social cues, to what the people around it expect, to what they treat as normal, to who they seem to believe you are. And when the people who spend the most time with you hold a version of you that predates your transformation, every interaction with them is a subtle invitation to be that old version again. Not because they are trying to hold you back, because they simply have not updated their model of you yet. And your brain, which is still in the process of consolidating a new identity, finds the path of least resistance is often to just be who they expect. This does not mean cutting people out of your life. For most people, that is neither realistic nor necessary. It means being conscious about 3 things. First, who you are spending the most time with, and whether that time is predominantly spent with people whose version of you is current or outdated. People who treat your new standards as normal, who meet your ambition with their own, who hold you to the person you are becoming rather than the person you were. These people accelerate your transformation. Time with them is not just enjoyable, it is actively constructive. seek more of it. Second, how you respond when old dynamics assert themselves. Because they will. The old joke, the old role, the old expectation. Someone will reference the old version of you, as though it is still who you are, and in that moment you have a choice. You can default to the old version, play the role, confirm the expectation, maintain the dynamic, or you can simply not dramatically, not with a speech about how you have changed, just by responding as the new person, consistently, over time. The people around you will update their model, not quickly, but they will. Because models are updated by evidence, and you are the one producing the evidence. Third, where you can, seek new environments. Not to replace existing relationships, but to supplement them with contexts where the new version of you is the first version anyone has met, where there is no old model to be pulled back toward, where your current standards are simply your standards. No history, no comparison, no gravity from who you used to be. These environments, a new class, a new community, a new professional context, are extraordinarily valuable during transformation. Because in them, you are not fighting social gravity. You are operating in its absence. And the new identity consolidates faster in the absence of gravity than it does in constant resistance to it. One specific change in each of the three areas: physical space, inputs, people. Not everything at once. One change in each. And watch what happens to the consistency of the behaviors you have been building when the environment stops working against them. When those pieces begin to align, when the behavior is consistent and the environment is supporting it, something starts to change that you may not notice at first. The resistance gets quieter, not gone, quieter. The actions that required conscious effort begin to require less. The behaviors that felt slightly performed begin to feel natural. The version of you that you have been building begins to feel less like something you are trying to be, and more like simply who you are. This is the signal that it is time to expand. Not because you have arrived, but because the foundation is now strong enough to build higher. The person who started with 45 minutes of focused work is now ready for 90. The person who committed to 3 training sessions per week is now ready for 5. The person who started with 10 minutes of reading is now ready for 30. Not because a prescribed timeline says so, but because the behavior has stopped requiring the same level of effort to sustain. An effort that is not being spent on sustaining the baseline can now be directed toward raising it. Identify one area, just one, where the behavior has become genuinely consistent, where you no longer have to force yourself to do it, where it simply happens because it is what you do. And in that one area, raise the standard, specifically, measurably, not across all 3 behaviors simultaneously, just the one that has consolidated most completely. Because raising the standard in one area that has consolidated is fundamentally different from raising the standard across everything at once. The first builds momentum, the second produces overwhelm. Alongside this expansion, honest reflection becomes important. Not journaling if journaling is not your thing. Not a lengthy weekly review if that is not how you operate. Just a regular, honest check-in with the identity you defined at the beginning. Am I becoming this person? Not. Am I achieving the goals associated with this person? Am I becoming them? Is the gap between who I defined and who I am actually showing up as? Is that gap narrowing? Where is it narrowing most? Where is it still wide? Because this is also when the areas that have been successfully avoided since the beginning need attention. The comfortable areas have expanded. Now the uncomfortable ones need to be approached. Not all of them, the most important one. The one that, if changed, would produce the most significant shift in your overall trajectory. Approach it, not with a complete overhaul, with a single specific action. One thing that moves you toward it, taken consistently, until it becomes the foundation of what comes next. And what comes next is not more building, it is protection. There is a point in every genuine transformation where the greatest threat is no longer the difficulty of change. It is regression. Regression is normal, expected. It is not failure. It is the old identity making one final significant assertion, reminding you of who you used to be. Testing whether the new identity is real or performed. And regression tends to arrive in specific, predictable forms, not randomly. In the situations, states, and environments that are most strongly associated with the old version of you. A difficult period at work. A return to a familiar environment from the past. A stretch of high stress, where the brain defaults to its oldest and most established patterns. A conversation with someone who knew you well before any of this began. These are your regression triggers. And the difference between transformation that holds and transformation that collapses is almost always determined by how prepared you are for them. Identify your 3 highest regression triggers, the specific situations or states that are most likely to pull you back toward the old pattern. You know what they are. They are not a mystery. They are the situations where you have historically been least consistent, where the old version of you shows up most reliably. Write them down, and for each one, decide in advance, not in the moment, what you will do when it arrives. Not a complicated plan, a simple, specific response. When this happens, I do this, because the moment of regression is the worst time to make a decision about how to respond to regression. In that moment, the old identity has the most pull. The new one feels distant. And without a pre-made decision to return to, the path of least resistance is always back to the familiar. But with a pre-made decision, with a clear, simple, specific thing you have already decided you will do, the regression becomes something you move through, rather than something that moves you. At this point, also return to the 3 honest questions from the beginning. What is working now that was not working when you started? What is still not working? What are you still avoiding looking at? The gap between those first answers and these new ones is your transformation made visible. Not the dramatic version, the real version. The version made of specific changed behaviors, specific changed defaults, specific changed responses to the same situations that used to produce the same old outcomes. That gap is what deliberate, consistent, unglamorous work actually looks like. And it is more significant than most people expect. The person who has moved through all of this does not look the same as the person who started. Not in a dramatic way, in a specific way. Consider how the same situations play out differently. The old version received an unexpected setback, a plan that fell apart, a result that did not come, and spent days in a low-grade spiral of self-doubt and distraction before slowly returning to baseline. The new version receives the same setback, sits with it briefly, adjusts, and returns to work. Not because the setback mattered less, but because their default response to difficulty has changed. Where the old version would procrastinate on something important by doing something easier, the new version starts with the important thing, because that is simply what they do first. Where the old version would have a hard conversation building in their mind for weeks, dreading it, avoiding it, letting it take up mental space it was not entitled to. The new version has it within a day, not because they have become fearless, but because they have accumulated enough evidence that they are someone who does the hard thing and the brain now anticipates the relief of completion, rather than the discomfort of the conversation. Where the old version set a standard and then quietly negotiated themselves out of it when maintaining it, became inconvenient. The new version holds it, not rigidly, not without humanity, but consistently enough that the standard is real, rather than aspirational. These are not extraordinary changes. They are the specific, ordinary, daily changes that consistent evidence accumulation actually produces. And the cumulative effect of these changes, of responding differently, deciding differently, holding different standards across hundreds of small moments, is a life that is measurably, visibly, tangibly different. Not because one dramatic thing changed, because hundreds of small things changed. And hundreds of small things changing is what unrecognizable actually looks like from the inside. From the outside, it looks different. From the outside, the people who knew you before notice something they cannot immediately articulate. An energy that was not there before. A clarity in how you speak about what you are doing and why. A groundedness in situations that used to visibly unsettle you. They will not always have words for it. They will say things like, "You seem different. You seem more certain. You seem like you know where you're going." And they will be right. Not because your destination has been perfectly mapped, but because the person navigating has fundamentally changed. That is what the other side looks like. Not a transformation story with a dramatic before and after. Just a person who quietly and consistently became someone they actually respect. And from that foundation, everything else becomes possible. Before we close, there is one thing that needs to be said directly. This process is not linear. The early parts will not feel like progress. The middle parts will feel like regression in some areas. There will be periods where the old identity reasserts itself so completely that the decision made at the beginning feels like it happened to a different person. This is not failure. This is the actual texture of identity change. It is not a straight line from old self to new self. It is a negotiation, a back and forth between who you have been and who you are becoming. And the outcome of that negotiation is determined by one thing: what you do after the regression. Whether you treat it as evidence that change is not available to you, or whether you treat it as a temporary assertion of the old pattern and return. Every return matters more than the regression, because the brain is watching the pattern across time, not the individual days, and a pattern of returning, of consistently coming back to the new identity after being pulled away from it, is itself the most powerful evidence the brain can receive. Not that you never struggled, but that you always came back. That is the one thing: return. Every time. Without drama. Without extended self-criticism. Without treating the regression as more significant than it is. Just return. The person who always returns is by definition someone who does not stop. And someone who does not stop becomes someone unrecognizable. 6 months from now is arriving. Today, tomorrow, the next day. Whether this video changes anything or not, that time will pass. The question has always been the same: who arrives when it does? The answer to that question is not fixed. It is being written right now, in the honest inventory you are willing to take, in the identity decision you are willing to make and hold, in the evidence you are willing to accumulate quietly, unglamorously, across the ordinary days that most people overlook because they are waiting for something dramatic to change them. Nothing dramatic is coming. The transformation is in the ordinary, in showing up as the new person before you fully believe you are them, in returning every time the old pattern pulls you back, in protecting what you build when the regression arrives. because it will. Until one day, somewhere in the process, you respond to something in a way that the person you were at the beginning would not have responded. And you notice, not with pride, just with quiet recognition, that the response was not forced. It was simply who you are now. That is the moment. 6 months. It is already beginning. If this made sense to you, you already know why you're here. We'll talk again.